out of the whole vegetable garden. And like, not only that, but a vegetable garden that I can continue to draw from all the time. And after 3 years, very intensive training, it was great fun, but it is quite intensive. At the end of it, I wonder, and I just finished in June, I wonder, like, what did I learn? And really the biggest thing I learned after the 3 years is that I cannot explain to somebody in a nutshell what the Alexander technique is. And I think this is a common problem with Alexander technique. But Richard says it's like watching a James Bond film. You know, if you go to a James Bond film and somebody says, "Look, what was it like?" and you say, "Well, it was great, but if I tell you about it, I'd spoil it for you." So really, the Alexander technique is something I think that you have to experience, really. And anybody who's here, I think I'm probably speaking to a lot of people who have already experienced it, and that's what we all know about it, you know. But I think I'd have to, like, I have to say that I love this man. I love Richard Brennan, and I mean that, like, and I hope Caroline's wife. That doesn't mean I want to sleep with him or anything now, but I think that's Caroline. But the thing is, but I think that
are fans too, you know.
Yeah, the Alexander technique is more about posture and. But I really do love Richard because I think he's somebody, and he embodies what I think most Alexander technique teachers I know do. He embodies something that is very, very special. I had a bit of another kind of an illness altogether last week, and suddenly found myself in a position of going to an Alexander teacher. I had been at the doctor, I had been in hospital, and I got fantastic care, without a doubt, anywhere. But I also topped it off with an Alexander lesson from Richard, which he very kindly offered me. As an Alexander technique teacher, the last thing I'd think of doing was going for an Alexander lesson. But gladly, Richard called me, and it was just extraordinary what happened there after all the stuff that I've been through, and it's helped me so much since during the week to recover more quickly than I would have otherwise. You know? So I'm grateful for that. And so when it comes to that, the Alexander technique is clearly about a lot more than just backs. But Richard has said already that 4 million people Google back pain every single month, like around the world. Just if you look at it, it's 4 million people. So it's a very, very common thing. So it's not a surprise that he came to write a book like this. The other thing which he tells us in the book, when he looked to see how many books are written on back pain, there's 88,000. So you'd say, what's the point? But like, you'd wonder, what's the point in doing another book on the Alexander technique? And this is really what all this is about today, about launching this book, and this is why this book. He tells us in a nutshell how all of the things that this book doesn't do, like that, you know, 88,000. I mean, obviously from a marketing point of view, you have to come up with a unique selling proposition about why people should buy this book. But like, I haven't come across any kind of bullshit, if I can say that, about marketing the Alexander technique, which is probably why it isn't as well known as it should be. People don't seem to be able to just get that kind of mojo with it or something, you know, except the people who come and experience it. So we've got that problem in the Alexander world, and it's been there for over 100 years. It's not anything that any of us are going to solve straight away. But I think that Richard points out all the things that it doesn't do. It's not exercises telling you about what to do, how to fix the back or anything. Ultimately, it's just about posture in our everyday movements. Nobody ever seems to say this. And again, I've spent 3 years training as an Alexander teacher, and usually if I say to somebody, you know, I'm an Alexander teacher, people say, oh yeah, what's that like? It's like Pilates, yoga, you know, is it kind of physiotherapy? And of course it's not about any of those things. And immediately you're kind of set up to say, well, it's not those things, so those things are no good and the Alexander technique is the only thing. That is not the case whatsoever. Physiotherapy is absolutely excellent and totally necessary. Pilates, yoga, they've all been around for a long time. The Alexander technique has been around longer than most people know. It's not like a recent fad like mindfulness or something like that, even though it contains the best of mindfulness as well. But I think Richard points this out, that ultimately, for back pain or anything, it's ultimately we've got to look at just what our absolutely everyday movements are, and understand that those postures come about through daily habits, And unless we can actually stop and notice those habits, we can never do it. So again, there's actually no point. This is, I think, probably, and I just thought of this when I was reading through the book. I read the whole book, by the way. You can see I underlined it and wrote things on the side and everything so that I could show it to my teacher. But the thing is, with Pilates, physiotherapy, and yoga, I've done everything. I've done all of those, and most Alexander teachers do all of those as well. But the point, I think, what is the crucial difference, which is pointed out here in the book, which Richard points out very well in telling us a whole lot of things, is that there's no point in going to either. There's no point in going if you've got a postural habit of doing something that you don't even know that you're doing, and you'll bring that into yoga, you'll bring it into Pilates, and you'll bring it into physiotherapy. I'm only picking those 3 modalities. Like there's loads of others as we know, but. This is the fundamental thing, and Richard said he has spoken to everybody in the medical field in all kind of modalities over a long time, and nobody understands this thing about what we call faulty sensory perception. Like we've got 5 senses. I'll have to write these down because I can never. Sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch are the 5 senses that we know. But there's actually a 6th sense, which is a sense of where we are in space at any given time and what's going on inside us, and that's completely ignored. So that anybody that you go to in any modality, often that very thing is missed, and that's what's extraordinary about Alexander's discovery. He discovered, obviously, through the loss of his voice, that it was something he was doing himself that brought about the loss of the voice. It didn't just happen to me. And Richard was always saying, you don't just suddenly get a back pain that falls down from the sky, or you don't get anything. Well, we do it because we bring it about by our habits. And it's as simple as that. And that's revolutionary, I think. And it is actually totally missed, or not necessarily ignored through ignorance or anything, but it's just people don't have time to even stop and think that. And again, so I really do hope that we can actually all, and that's why I am an Alexander teacher probably, that I've learned this for myself, and I want to teach other people that as well. And again, there's no competition. There's none of this business, well, is it better than this or is it better than the other? It is absolutely complementary to everything as a basic way of being, I think, So that's why I love the Alexander technique. It's still not a mainstream thing, but all of us are going to continue to work away with it. And Richard has done more than anybody else probably in Ireland. We owe great debt to him. I personally owe great debt to him, and I imagine that the debt that I owe to him is a similar debt that many people here owe to him as well. So. It's not, again, a popularity contest. But, that's why I love Richard, and I'll get in free to some of the talks. Right. So that's all I've got to say. So I'd just like to ask Richard to say a few words before we finish. We might have a tune or two after if people want to stay. So I'll hand you over to Richard Brennan, the author of
Margaret just asked me, why I write, and it's actually quite interesting because it's a very short question, but there's a very long answer. The reason I write started when I was about 21, and I was looking through a paper, and I saw an advertisement for wanted driving instructor. And there was 2 little phrases underneath that really attracted my attention. The first one was no experience necessary. Okay? And the one that really got me was you can take the car home in the evenings for use. Okay? And since I didn't have a car at the time, I decided that I would actually ring the number, and I got the job. Okay? And I was 21. And I thought, well, I'll do this for 6 months, a year, and then I will move on to something else. It wasn't like my life's path. But the only trouble is, in the meantime, I got married, I started having children, and I had to support the children, so that 6 months turned into about 10 years of teaching people to drive. And when you're teaching people to drive, you actually are sitting in a car seat pretty much for 8 to 10 hours a day, and even today, car seats aren't very well designed, and in the early 70s they were even worse. So I did this I did this for 10 years, and then after about maybe 3 or 4 years, I would get a niggle in the back. It's a bit like somebody driving to Dublin and back in one day, and they get out of the car, they feel a little stiff, and then they walk around and it's fine. And then that actually turned into something a little bit more serious, that even when I was walking around I couldn't get rid of it. And then after a while I started to, every time I sat, stand or walked, I would get this shearing pain all the way down my leg in the form of sciatica. And I would do what pretty much anyone else would actually do. You would go to the doctor. And going to the doctor for most people involves sitting around the waiting room for 40 minutes, and then your name getting called, and you go in, and the doctor's there, and he doesn't even really look at you. He just asks you what's wrong, and then you get given a prescription for either a muscle relaxant or a painkiller or an anti-inflammatory. Okay, that was kind of late 70s, and it hadn't really changed a great deal from then. I didn't have the experience of waiting around the waiting room for 40 minutes because my father was the GP. Okay, but I still got the prescription. I wasn't really examined. There was no examination. Okay, and he actually used to say, even before I got the back pain, he used to say, if you want a day off work, just say you have back problems, because nobody can tell whether you have, and nobody can tell if you haven't, and even if you have, nobody can do anything about it. Okay? And that was his kind of philosophy. And anyway, I got the painkillers, and while I was taking the painkillers and not working and not sitting in the car and just resting, the pain seemed to get less. And then after a while, even that didn't actually work. So then it was the course of physios, and it wasn't just one physio, it was about 8 physios. And then I ended up in a physiotherapy hospital as an inpatient, and I really hope there's not too many physios here, because actually my experience of physiotherapy as an inpatient was I walked away even with more pain than I actually walked in the hospital with. Okay, there was, I remember distinctly, there was a posture class, and basically these were people with major back problems and neck problems, and the orthopedic surgeon used to grab your shoulders, and he used to knee you in the back and pull your shoulders back to make you sit up straight. And most of the people in the posture class used to walk around, or crawl out of the classes with tears streaming down their face. Okay? But they had to do something. They didn't know what to do, so they did something. Okay? Anyway, after the physiotherapy, it was the orthopedic surgeon, and I remember them injecting dye into my spine. It was a bluish colour, and they didn't have MRIs in those days. And when they got the results back from this, I can't even remember the name of the test, but he said that you have very little disc left in the bottom 3 vertebrae. So what we suggest you do is we extract what's left of the disc, and then we fuse the bottom 3 or 4 vertebrae. Okay, it will restrict your movement, but at least you won't have any pain. Okay, so can you sign here? So I signed on the dotted line for this operation, and in those days there was about 6 months waiting list, which was probably a very, very good thing, because in that 6 months I actually mentioned to my father that I was going for the operation, and he said, whatever you do, don't do it, because I see the people afterwards. Okay, so that was the end of the medical route, and then it was the chiropractor and the osteopath and the acupuncturist and the Reiki healer and the metamorphic technique, and I became an expert in alternative therapies due to going from one place to another, trying to find something. I had heard of the Alexander technique, but only in the context of it was something that actors and musicians did, and therefore because I didn't play a musical instrument and I wasn't acting on stage, I didn't take any notice of it. And I just mentioned, and then after trying pretty much everything, I just resigned myself that I actually would be in pain. I couldn't work at this point, and I could hardly walk at this point. Okay? And then I bumped into an Alexander teacher who basically, for about 45 minutes, in a very, very harsh Scottish accent, explained exactly what the Alexander technique is.
How did
And
you do
after
that?
45 minutes, I walked away and I thought, I don't understand a word. I had no idea what he was actually talking about. But obviously he was enthusiastic about something, and he did say it could help back pain. So at the end of the 45 minutes, he said, look, I'll show you. And this is exactly what actually happened. He sat me in a chair, and the first thing he said is, do you usually sit like this? And my thought was, what's he talking about? Sit like what? And he said, you're sitting way over to the left and twisting to the right. And then he showed me in the mirror how I was sitting, and I was really quite shocked that actually he was dead right. And yet I felt completely straight. Okay? And then he came behind me and he got my head, and very, very gently he actually moved my head. Okay? And what I actually felt like, I felt way off to the right and twisted to the left. Okay? But when he showed me the mirror, I was sitting perfectly straight. And I realized after maybe a week or two after having that lesson, that when you teach people to drive, that's exactly what you do. You twist in the car because you have to look to make sure this person looks in the mirror, and you have to be looking at the road at the same time. So for 10 years I've been just sitting really twisted. And then I was twisting because it had become a habit. Okay, I was doing that while watching TV and whatever. And what we're talking about with postural habit, it'll be a good idea if I just show people what we're actually talking about. Can you, if you're not doing so already, can you just fold your arms? Okay, so I've got one hand out here, one hand in there, and all I would like you to do is I want you to actually change over. Okay, that's what I mean by habit. Because most people can't even find it. And when you do find it, you go, this doesn't feel very comfortable. I'd much rather go back to this. Okay, and that is all that actually happened. Another good example of what we're talking about with habit is actually standing on one leg. So when people stand for a long time, they invariably sort of sink down into one hip. Okay? And yet they would never sink down into the other hip. And yet this hip is going to be the one that's worn out first. Okay, so the postural habits I actually have are okay in themselves, but if I carry on doing it again and again and again and again, they can lead to major problems. And they can wear disc out, and they can trap nerves, and they can do all the things that were happening. And that's all that had actually happened. But the other interesting thing is, when he got my head and he put me straight, because I could see in the mirror, the pain got less. The back pain got less. Straight away, immediately. And that was really quite an eye-opener, that actually the way that I'd actually been sitting had actually been trapping the nerve. Now what really amazed me is not that phenomenon, but I've been to my father who was a GP, I've been to about 8 physiotherapists, I've been to about 8 or 9 different chiropractors and osteopaths, and I've been to all these Reiki healers and metamorphic techniques, and nobody had actually looked at the way I was sitting. Nobody. Okay, that was what was so fascinating. Okay, and so when I after a few lessons I was free from back pain, and I was so flabbergasted that actually I decided I would like to go and help people with back pain, and that's it. And then I did the 3-year course to be an Alexander teacher, and then coming out I was very enthusiastic, and I wanted to go out, so I went around and did a lot of education classes, again I suppose spread the word. I suppose it's a bit evangelical, but actually I was so amazed that half the population had back pain, and nobody's looking at the way I stand, the way I sit, or the way I walk. Nobody. Okay? They're trying to fix something. Oh yeah, you've got a bone out of place, so let's put it back in. And the fact is that if you don't change how you stand and sit, that disc will be out in 3 or 4 weeks' time anyway. So then I was doing these classes, and somebody said, oh, can you advise a good book? And I just thought, well, there was a book that I thought was very, very straightforward. It was by a guy called Malcolm Galway. Very, very simple language, I thought. So I lent it to that person, I lent it to a few people, And every time I did it, the person came back and said, oh, it's far too complicated for me. So I saw that there was a niche of somebody writing a book that was actually for right from basic, right from knowing nothing. And that's what I actually did. That was in 1991. And then I just found that actually writing was a good way of spreading the fact that the message is you don't have to suffer with back pain. You don't have to suffer with back pain. And that's why I wrote the back pain book, because I just thought half the population, that's huge, that's huge. And in the book it just explains why we get backache in the first place and actually what to do about it. And in the back of the book there are, I did ask people for case histories, and we have 2 in the audience, okay? So thank you for your contribution.
You'll be speaking next
time. Katrina, okay? So they're real live people. It's not like I made up all these stories and then I just added different names to them, you know. So, and I was delighted that people actually contributed in the way they did.
My sister-in-law.
And you know, and these are people who had long-term back problems, and like me, tried loads and loads and loads of things. So it wasn't just a one-off with me. The people I really enjoy helping, and I had one this afternoon, is I have had back pain for 15 or 16 years, and I've actually tried everything. Those are the people I really love teaching, because they've almost given up hope, but not quite. But not quite. And this is it's not a therapy. It's an education that I'm re-educating how I'm going to carry out my activities in day-to-day life. And it does involve mental, physical and emotional content. It's a holistic way of looking at my life. And the reason I chose the title Back in Balance, because not only does it make your spine more aligned, but it actually puts your whole life back into balance. Because a lot of the problems are caused by I don't have enough time in the day, I'm rushing around, I'm feeling stressed, I'm trying to balance my life, I'm trying to juggle all these tasks I have to actually do. So just to realise that actually I don't have to actually do that. And people do make profound changes as well. I don't want anyone to start worrying, but they do. Sometimes if a job is not serving them, they actually give up their job. They realise that actually I don't have to be married to my job. I don't have to be married to what it is I'm actually doing. So even though the whole technique is very gentle, big changes and shifts happen in people's lives for the better. For the better. Okay? So if you want to buy the book, you're very welcome. And don't forget, there are only 85 shopping days left for Christmas. It may be a very good time to actually do your Christmas shopping. You know? There might be, you know, I'm sure nearly everybody knows people who have bad backs. Well, it could be the best present you ever give them. So thank you for coming, and thank you for listening, and you've alleviated my fear, because my fear is to have these book launches and 3 people turn up. Caroline, Tomas and Tina, and then they're in problems. So I do appreciate people making the effort to come, and hope you'll have a glass of wine and whatever. So I'll leave the last word for Tomas.
Thanks very much. I want to just on behalf of Richard thank Charlie Byrne's books, and Vinnie Brown in particular. In my previous life, I know this to be the place with the most heart, I think, of any business in Galway, apart from Murphy's. But, which I think Vinnie frequents sometimes. But Charlie Byrne's are just so brilliant, and it actually occurred to me when Richard was speaking here. You know, people are continually walking around here browsing, and it'd be a fantastic place for Alexander Technique teachers to come and just maybe help people to understand how they're standing maybe when they're picking books. So you may see more of us, Vinnie.
Well, there is a bookseller's back.
Yeah, okay. That's great. So thanks a million, Vinnie, for being so generous to us here and staying open late and everything. So really appreciate that. And long may Charlie Byrne's, with all the electronic book reading that goes on, long may Charlie Byrne's and places like it try it. I think we'll be lost. Oh yeah. And I just won that award, of course, which we all know, the Irish Translation. Yeah. So it's great. So I think we'll leave it at that. And thanks a million again. It's great to see such a big crowd. I'm heartened by it Sorry, Colette, I didn't see Colette. Her daughter used to work with me in a previous lifetime.
Previous life was right.
I'd say I gave her a bit of a bad back when she was working with me. But anyway, thanks very much. We might play a few more tunes. I don't know, what time are you throwing us out at?
Carry on!
So
we're here for another hour anyway.
Great. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you.